A friend is going to join me on the stage. I want to show you real life how tithing and trusting God can change a family. Would you welcome Kevin to the stage? I got one of these things and I pulled it out of him, and listen to this testimony.
Proverbs chapter 3 verse 5 and 6 says, "Trust the Lord with all thy heart and lean not on thine own understanding." I said that because when me and my wife first got married, that was the verse God gave me the day that we decided we were going to get married. And I never knew at that moment that was really literally going to be the foundation of our marriage. So you fast forward, we were living with my parents' house, and then we decided to buy a house. And all in that moment, got a new job, and it was just awesome. Had a lot of time off, making good money. And, she brought into me the tithing. She was like, we got to pay tithe. So, we got married, and, I got this good job, and was there for 3 years. We decided to buy our first house. We bought our first house on March 16th. March 30th, I walk in to my job. The boss calls me in the office and says, sorry, but your position's been compromised because of a layoff. Now, I hadn't even made my first mortgage payment yet, and I had a 2-year-old son. My wife was pregnant. We were going to have the next baby in June. So I'm on the ride home. It was ATK in Elkton. I lived in Northeast, so I'm on the way home crying, man tears, crying. But, I'm like, Lord, what am I going to do? And this verse kept ringing in my head, trust me, trust me. So I get home, and the first words out of her mouth was, we just got to trust God. So later on, I'm reading in that same Proverbs, it says at the end there, in verse 10, it says, honor the Lord with all thy possessions, with the first fruits of your increase, so that your barns would be filled with plenty. So I get home, we get the unemployment straightened out, and that was the hardest thing I've ever done, was pay tithe on that first unemployment check. Because I had a whole family to provide for, I had a mortgage payment. Next one came, we paid tithe on that. So next thing I know, we just kept saying we're going to give God the first fruits. And that's what I want to say too, is it's easy to tithe on the last, but it takes faith and that trust that he's talking about in Proverbs, that trust comes in when you start tithing, because you're just shifting a load to God when you tithe, that first fruit. So we paid tithe on that first, 10% of anything came in, we paid off the top. So we paid the first 2 unemployments, and we're looking at each other like, what are we going to do? The next week, I said, well, I can paint cars. I kid you not, within 3 days, people brought to me cars to paint and astronomical amounts of money. Like, as far as, I said I was going to do it for this price, they were going to offer me this price. So we're like, praise God, it was going along. Well, then a month, we paid 10% on that. Next month, we find out we were first-time home buyers, so they were going to give us an $8,000 tax credit. We're like, praise God. So this whole time, God's providing for us. We're giving 10%. God's providing for us. And I'm still, so then all of a sudden that dries up, and I'm back to paying that 10% again, 10%. That's all we kept doing. So all of a sudden, God brings me this job, and I was making the same money I was making at ATK, and we were going along. And I get teared up because when God shows up in your world, when you're at your lowest point, like in those areas where I'm struggling to provide for a family, and the whole time he's just telling me to trust him. And each time we trusted him, he stepped up even higher. And then every time we trust him, he stepped up even higher. So God gives me this job. And I'm sorry, I wasn't making quite as much as I was at ATK. And we just kept paying tithe, and we kept paying tithe. We never missed a mortgage payment, just kept moving along. And since that point in my life at ATK, and now when I was at ATK, I thought that was the job I was retiring from. I don't know if you've ever been in that spot where you find this perfect job. The time off was good. I was home with my family making good money. I thought I was retiring there. I'm like, I'm set. We're buying a house. I'm set. And God shook my world all up. And in that moment was when I really began to trust him. And to this day, I'm making double what I was making at ATK. Double. And so I want to challenge, in my life and my wife's life, I tell you, when we talk to people about tithe, we get excited because God has always been faithful. When you read these verses and God shows up in your world, it'll give you goosebumps. I'm telling you, so I challenge all of our campuses not only to give God 10%, but give him the first 10%. And I promise you, I challenge you, because he will show up, and when he shows up in your world, it'll knock your socks off. It'll knock your socks off. And he's been preaching on consistency and doing the same thing. It might not happen first tithe check you put in, and all of a sudden, you get the win the Mega Millions or whatever. But it's a process, and in that process, it triggers that trust in your life. And when it starts with that, I tell people all the time, if they're dealing with like trying to get stronger in God, I said it starts with tithing, because tithing, when you get that first 10%, you're shifting that complete load to God, and you're giving God, you're saying, God, I trust you with that other 90, even though on paper it don't add up, but I'm trusting you with that other 90. So then you begin to trust God in more areas in your life. But I'm telling you tonight, wherever you're at in your walk, that tenth, that tithe really shifts the load. And I tell people all the time, tithing triggers trust. Woo!